I never told my son that I earned $35,000 a month. In Daniel's eyes, I was always the quiet woman who lived in a small apartment in North Park, left early for work, came home late, ate dinner off a chipped ceramic plate, and drank tea from a mug with faded glaze. A simple, frugal, and dull mother. At least that's how the world saw me, and I let him believe that. For 18 years. That afternoon, the wind from La Jolla Bay blew hard, making the thin curtain flap against the window. I was brewing coffee when the phone rang. Daniel's voice came through, slightly shaky, as if he were preparing for something. "Mom, this weekend, I need you to help me with something." I smiled. "What is it, son?" "Aria's parents are visiting from Buenos Aires. They'd like to meet you. I made a reservation at Cobalt Terrace, the restaurant overlooking the cliff. Can you come?" There was a short pause. His voice dropped. "I told them you live a simple life. Work in an office. They think you're modest." I stayed silent for a few seconds. "Simple," I repeated slowly and clearly. A short, soft word, yet it felt heavy as a stone inside me. "Don't take it the wrong way, Mom. They just notice appearances. I don't want them to judge you." I cut him off gently. "It's all right, son. Saturday, 7 p.m. I'll be there." When I hung up, I stood still in the kitchen. The coffee cup on the table grew cold, the thin steam fading away. Simple. That word echoed in my mind like the ticking of the wall clock. I looked around the apartment. The white walls, the old wooden chair my father left me, the framed photo of Daniel and me at Coronado Beach. Everything was simple, just as my son said. But within that simplicity was freedom. No debts, no pretending, no need to prove anything. I had lived my whole life that way, and in that quiet, I had become rich in my own way. I opened the drawer and flipped through the leather notebook filled with numbers, contracts, and cost estimates. Those messy handwritten lines represented over 20 years at Pacific Link, from a night shift secretary to regional vice president, earning $35,000 a month. No one knew, not even my son. I always believed real power didn't need to be loud. It watched and waited for the right moment. That evening, I stood before the mirror. My hair had streaks of gray, my face showed wrinkles, but my eyes were still bright. I remembered Daniel's words. Mom lives simply. Maybe, to understand people's hearts, I should show them exactly that. I wanted to know who they truly were, the people about to become my son's family. I opened the closet and chose a faded gray cotton dress, soft flat shoes, and an old linen tote bag. No makeup, no perfume, just tied my hair neatly. In the mirror, I saw an ordinary woman, dull, forgettable, easy to overlook. Perfect for tonight. Saturday arrived with a chill in the La Jolla air. The taxi stopped in front of Cobalt Terrace, a luxurious restaurant perched above the Pacific Ocean cliffs. From outside, the crystal lights shimmered on the wall like waves. The sound of a guitar hummed low and melancholic. I paused for a moment, inhaled the salty breeze, and stepped in. The waiter bowed. "Good evening, ma'am." "I have a reservation with the Rivera party, 7 o'clock, I said. He checked the list and led me through. My shoes tapped softly on the polished wooden floor, a lonely sound among high heels, suits, and evening gowns. I saw Daniel first. He stood near the large window, the sunset glow casting tension across his face. "Mom, you're here." I smiled. "Of course, I wouldn't miss something this important." His eyes flicked over the old dress, paused at the worn tote bag, then quickly looked away. "You look different. Good or bad?" I asked lightly. He forced a laugh. "It's fine. They're waiting." When we reached the table, I immediately knew who was who. Celeste Rivera, Aria's mother, about 50, wore a sapphire blue sequin gown with a thick pearl necklace around her neck. Beside her sat her husband, Roberto, dignified, a silver watch gleaming on his wrist. Between them was Aria, beautiful, flawless, but the glance she gave me carried only polite formality. Celeste stood and extended her hand. "Mrs. Navarro, such a pleasure to meet you." Her hand was cold, her grip loose, a light touch as if afraid of getting dirty. Roberto nodded with a polite smile. "So nice to meet you both," I said softly. "Please sit." Celeste gestured to the end of the table, the farthest seat. No one pulled out the chair. I sat down and opened the menu printed entirely in French. Celeste tilted her head and smiled faintly. "Shall I help? Everything here is quite pricey. Let me order something simple for you." "Thank you," I said. "I'm not very familiar with this." She turned to the waiter. "Bring her the roast chicken. No wine." Then back to me, her voice sweet as honey. "We shouldn't be wasteful, right?" I replied. "Right. I like simple things." The table chuckled softly. A smooth, polished kind of laughter without warmth. Daniel lowered his head. Aria played with her diamond ring. Celeste twirled her wine glass, admiring her reflection in it. I looked out through the glass wall, the ocean dark and deep, waves crashing against the cliffs, spraying white foam. In that moment, I felt the chill of separation not between generations, but between values and facades. Celeste began talking about travel, their villa in Punta del Este, and the investments for Aria's wedding. "We just want our daughter to have the best start in life. She was raised to live beautifully." Then she paused and looked at me. "And Daniel is lucky to have a mother like you, modest and sensible." I sipped my water. It tasted salty on my tongue. "Yes," I said. "I've always believed the most important things aren't found in a wallet." They laughed again, delicately, knowingly. I stayed silent. In that silence, I remembered what I used to tell my juniors at work. When people start laughing because they think they're above you, that's when they've shown their true selves. Dinner went on. I didn't say much. I just listened to every word, every look. Each sentence they spoke was a soft cold cut. But I wasn't angry. I was intrigued. When the waiter refilled my glass, I caught the reflection of the candlelight flickering on the crystal. I knew that tonight was only the beginning, and I also knew that the moment I stepped into Cobalt Terrace, my life and theirs would never be the same again. People often think that women in their 60s should only talk about flowers, grandchildren, or aching knees. But I learned to measure time not by the wrinkles on my face, but by the times I stood up when there was no one left to help. And that journey began one morning many years ago, the day I walked out of a rented room with a torn suitcase and a 6-month-old baby in my arms. I was 23 then, a night shift secretary for a shipping company in San Diego. Daniel's father, a long-haul truck driver, disappeared the moment he learned I was pregnant. No goodbye, no promises. I used to sit in that tiny apartment, listening to the rain tapping on the window frame, wondering, does every woman's life begin from being left behind? But instead of crying, I went back to work on the Saturday after giving birth. My night shift started at 8 and ended when dawn touched the warehouse roof. I'd cradle Daniel to sleep in a wicker basket beside my desk, typing contracts with one hand while rocking him with the other. Sometimes I slept only 10 minutes, but I was grateful just to have work. 3 years later, I was promoted to assistant coordinator. Every dollar I earned was split in half, one for Daniel, one for savings. I didn't buy new clothes, didn't eat out, but I bought used books from a secondhand store on Elm Street, books about management and business law. Every night after Daniel fell asleep, I studied. I knew that if I wanted him to have a future, I had to be the one to build the road. 10 years passed. I became a regional supervisor, then an operations director. People said I was lucky. I just smiled. Luck to me was still having the strength to work an extra shift after 12 hours. It was when your son still believed you were calm, even when your account had only $20 left. Then one day, the chairman of Pacific Link called me into his office. He said, "Elena, I need someone who can oversee the entire Asia-Pacific region. You don't have an MBA, but you have something they don't: practicality and patience." From that day, my income was no longer measured weekly but monthly. $35,000, a number I had never dared to imagine. But what made me proud wasn't that number. It was the fact that I never let it define me. I bought this small apartment with my first savings, no loans. It wasn't luxurious, but it had sunlight through the windows and the sound of the sea at dawn. Every time I saw Daniel sleeping on the sofa, I remembered the night I signed my first contract. I had whispered, "From now on, I'll be your shoulder to lean on," and I kept that promise. As Daniel grew up, I tried to keep life as normal as possible. I didn't talk about work, didn't mention long flights, the meetings in glass towers, or the contracts I negotiated in Singapore, Tokyo, or Sydney. I only said, "I work in an office, that's all." Because I feared that if he knew how successful I truly was, he might forget what it means to stand on his own. I wanted him to understand the value of effort, not the power of money. Some people criticized me for hiding, saying I should let my son be proud. But I had seen too many families torn apart by pride. By 40, I understood that sometimes humility is the best armor against envy. I remember once, when Daniel was in college, he said, "I wish you could rest, Mom. You work too hard." I smiled and replied, "Someday I will. But today, I still have something to build." He didn't understand, and I didn't explain. Looking back now, I think that something wasn't just a career, but the belief that I still owned my life. I had no husband, no one beside me, yet I never felt lonely. Every morning, I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and listened to the waves offshore. That was enough. So when Daniel said I lived simply, I wasn't angry. I found it almost amusing because to him, simplicity meant lack, but to me, it meant freedom. He had never seen me sign million-dollar contracts or talk to foreign executives on video calls at 3 a.m. To him, I was just the woman in an old cardigan driving a 10-year-old Camry, and perhaps that was exactly how I wanted to be seen. But now, thinking about the upcoming dinner, I felt a strange stirring inside, not anger but a quiet curiosity. I wanted to see, in a world where people flaunt power and wealth, how they would perceive a woman like me if I gave them no sign of success. I would walk into that dinner not to prove anything, but to listen, to observe. Because, as in every major meeting I've attended over the past 18 years, I still believe that the one who speaks the least often understands the most. I closed the notebook and looked out the window, where the sunset painted San Diego Bay in crimson. The cry of seagulls echoed in the distance, and the ocean breeze stirred the curtain. Inside me rose a feeling both familiar and new, as if I were about to face an important board meeting, except this time, the meeting would take place over dinner, and my partners would be people who thought I wasn't worth noticing. One thing I knew for sure: they would judge me within the first 10 seconds, and I would show them exactly what they wanted to see. Because in this world, sometimes the best way to expose someone is to let them see themselves reflected in their own arrogance. I took the last sip of cold coffee and inhaled deeply. A soft breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine from the balcony. I smiled, quietly. "All right, Elena," I said to myself. This time not to defend, to observe. And with that, I knew the dinner at Cobalt Terrace wasn't just a meal. It was the opening act of a lesson none of us would ever forget. I have always believed that the way people treat someone they think is small reveals their true nature. Maybe that is why, that evening, as I stood before my wardrobe, I knew I was not just preparing for a dinner but for a test, a small examination of human nature. I opened the closet, glancing past rows of blazers and business dresses that had followed me through countless international conferences. They looked elegant and proper, yet as cold as armor. Tonight, I did not need armor. I needed a mirror that would reflect other people's hearts. I chose a faded gray cotton dress I usually wear to the weekend market, soft, worn-out flats and a linen tote with frayed handles. No makeup, no perfume, just a touch of lip balm to avoid looking too pale. I removed my watch and bracelet, leaving only a thin silver ring on the vanity. In the mirror, the woman staring back was no longer the vice president of operations at Pacific Link, but a retired mother living alone in a small apartment no one remembered. A simple woman, exactly as my son had described. I looked at myself for a long time. The light in the room cast gentle shadows across my face, highlighting every wrinkle around my eyes and mouth. Part of me felt unfamiliar, but another part felt peaceful. Perhaps this was my truest form, when I didn't need to impress anyone or prove anything at all. The wall clock pointed to 6:15. I poured myself half a glass of white wine, took a small sip, then put on a light coat. Outside, the sunset was sinking over the bay. Amber light spread across the rain-soaked streets, the scent of salt mixed with jasmine from someone's porch. I locked the door, the metallic click sounding like a soft period marking the end of an old chapter. The taxi arrived right on time. The driver, a middle-aged Mexican man with kind eyes and a friendly face, greeted me. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked. "Cobalt Terrace, La Jolla." "Oh, that's a fancy place," he chuckled. "A birthday?" I shook my head. "No, just a small dinner." "With who?" he asked, curious but warm. "With people who are about to teach me a lesson about human nature," I replied, half joking, half serious. He laughed, but didn't ask more. The car drove along the coastal road. The sky grew darker, waves crashed against the cliffs, and wind whistled through the window gap. I looked outside. Golden lights stretched along the shoreline, their reflections shimmering on the sea like vibrating metal strings. I had always loved La Jolla for its contrasts, peaceful yet powerful, just like me. On the way, I remembered the first time I took Daniel here when he was 8. We sat on the stone steps eating ice cream, and he asked, "Mom, does the ocean ever run out?" I told him, "No, sweetheart. The sea just pulls back for a while, only to return stronger." Thinking of it now, maybe that was what I was doing, pulling back, letting others reveal themselves. When the taxi turned into the restaurant parking lot, night had fully fallen. Golden lights from Cobalt Terrace's balcony shimmered like a string of pearls against the dark sky. A faint melody floated from somewhere inside, a bolero tinged with melancholic but beautiful. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:58. Perfect. I was always on time, even for battles only I knew were being fought. I opened the door, the cold wind rushing in, blowing a few silver strands of my hair. A young waiter greeted me at the entrance with a polite bow. "Good evening, ma'am. Reservation name?" "Rivera, 7 o'clock. He checked the list, smiled, and said, "This way, please." The polished wooden floor gleamed under the candlelight from each table. The aroma of wine, melting butter, and soft conversation filled the air, creating a scene both elegant and distant. I knew that within minutes, all this warmth and beauty would become the backdrop of a play whose actors had no idea they were performing. As I walked past the rows of tables, I saw couples raising glasses, groups of friends laughing. No one noticed the woman in a gray cotton dress walking by. I liked that. Sometimes invisibility is the strongest weapon. I saw Daniel first. He stood near the large window, the ocean light reflecting on his face. His eyes flickered when he saw me, a mix of relief and worry. "Mom, you're here." I smiled. "I said I would be." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You look different. Better or worse?" I asked, half teasing. "It's fine," he said quickly, though I caught the tension in his eyes. He led me to the table. I saw Celeste Riveraith, woman I had only known from the wedding photos, elegant, poised, eyes sharp as glass. Beside her sat Roberto, tall, salt and pepper hair, a silver watch gleaming on his wrist. Between them was Aria, my daughter, beautiful, confident, her smile perfectly practiced. Celeste stood and extended her hand. "Mrs. Navarro, so lovely to meet you." Her hand was cold, her grip loose, her smile reaching her lips but not her eyes. "Likewise," I replied softly. "Please sit," she said, pointing to the seat at the far end of the table. No one pulled out the chair. I sat down and opened the menu, all in French. I squinted deliberately, pretending not to understand. Celeste tilted her head and smiled. "Let me help. Everything here is quite expensive. I'll order something simple for you." I nodded. "Thank you, I'm not familiar with this." "Roast chicken," she told the waiter. "No wine," then turned back to me with a sugary tone. "We shouldn't be wasteful, should we?" I smiled. "You're right. I like simplicity." The faint clinking of silverware filled the air. Daniel stared down at his glass of water. Aria adjusted her napkin, and Celeste swirled her wine as if admiring her reflection. I looked out the window. The ocean was dark. the waves colliding with the rocks, moonlight shimmering on the surface. Amid the elegance, I felt an odd stillness settle inside me. Dinner hadn't truly begun, yet I had already seen what I came to see, the way they looked at men not with their eyes but with the measure of their own worth. I took a deep breath. The scent of salt drifted through the window, mingling with wine and lavender from the nearby table. I smiled faintly. The play had begun, and I was ready to play their poor woman, at least until the curtain fell. The waiter placed the menus down, leaning slightly to pour wine for Celeste first, then for Roberto and Aria. I was given only a glass of water. That small gesture was enough to make me smile quietly. In places like this, the distinctions always revealed themselves in the tiniest details of the type of glass, the choice of wine, even the way a napkin was folded. Celeste swirled her Bordeaux gently, her voice smooth and drawn out like a silk thread. "This is a 2016 Saint Emilion. A bottle like this costs over $200, but the taste is absolutely worth it. Do you drink wine, Mrs. Navarro?" I shook my head lightly. "Only on special occasions. I'm not very familiar with wine." Celeste's deep red lips curved into a smile. "Oh, that's all right. Not everyone's palate is trained. It comes with experience from traveling, seeing the world." Her tone floated like air, but her eyes glinted with a blade's edge. I simply smiled. "You're right. I suppose everyone has their own way of learning about the world. I learn by listening." Roberto chuckled politely. "Aria told us Daniel is very hard-working, with a bright future. He works in banking, right?" "Yes," I replied. "He's doing well. I'm proud of him." Celeste interjected sweetly. "And you, where do you work, Mrs. Navarro? Daniel mentioned you're still working?" "I work in a small office," I said slowly, lowering my voice as if embarrassed. "Paperwork, records, nothing worth mentioning." Celeste nodded approvingly. Administrative work, wonderful, honest labor. At your age, still, that's admirable," I replied with a gentle smile. "Yes, I suppose when people don't have much, they have to try a little harder." Aria frowned slightly. Daniel lowered his head, eyes fixed on his phone. I could see my only son caught between two worlds, one wrapped in velvet arrogance, the other his poor mother. The waiter brought the dishes. On Celeste's plate sat a perfectly grilled steak, sprinkled with sea salt crystals as large as diamonds. She sliced the first piece slowly, savoring it. "This dish costs $80, she said, "but it's worth it. You have to know how to choose the right beef. This restaurant imports directly from Kobe." I nodded evenly. "Sounds wonderful." Celeste took a sip of wine, her eyes flicking toward me. "And you? Are you enjoying your meal? I ordered the simplest one for you." "Thank you," I said. "It's better than I expected." A brief silence passed. Only the sound of cutlery filled the air. Then Celeste sighed softly, set her fork down, and tilted her head. "You know, I truly admire women like you, living simply, independently, not relying on anyone. But it must be hard, right? At your age, still taking care of yourself?" I smiled. "Sometimes it's tiring. But I'm used to it, I save. I don't need much." "How admirable," she said, her tone tender but her eyes glimmering with scrutiny. "Still, it must be lonely, living alone, with no one to share things with?" "Not really," I replied. "Sometimes silence is the reward." Celeste let out a soft laugh. "Oh, you're quite the optimist. At this age, I think women need stability, financial, emotional, and family. Roberto and I are lucky to help our daughter begin her marriage in comfort. We paid for the house, the honeymoon, everything. A proper start for someone you love, don't you think?" I nodded, raising my glass of water. "Love is wonderful when it doesn't need to be proven with receipts." She hesitated for a moment, then forced a smile. "Of course. Though financial support is also love. Everyone wants their children to have a better life." I said softly. "Everyone does, but not everyone shows it the same way." The air grew tense. Roberto cleared his throat, trying to change the subject. "So, at the wedding, did you help Daniel in any way?" I set down my fork. "Just a little." I gave him a small painting for the living room. It was his father's keepsake. Celeste's brow lifted, her eyes flickered before she said gently, "How meaningful." "Of course, we all know money can't buy memories." I laughed lightly. "Yes, but sometimes it's money that makes people forget the memories worth keeping." Daniel looked at me with pleading eyes while Arya stared down, embarrassed. I felt strangely calm, as if watching a play whose ending I already knew. But Celeste wasn't finished. She went on about her daughter's luxury apartment, the new Italian sofa, and their planned trip to Switzerland. Every sentence was wrapped in sweetness, laced with glances at my faded shoes. When dessert arrived, she smiled flawlessly. "What a pleasant evening. I'm so glad to know more about Daniel's mother. Oh, and I have a small suggestion. I know you live alone and your income is modest. We could help a little, just to make things easier for you." I looked at her for a long moment, setting my spoon down. "Help how?" Celeste sipped her wine, voice dripping with honey. "A small allowance, a few $100s a month perhaps. Think of it as a gift from family, so Daniel doesn't have to worry about you." The air froze. Arya bit her lip, Daniel clenched his hands, and I just smiled. "How generous," I said. "And in return, what would I do?" Celeste tilted her head, her voice lowering. "Just not bother your son too much. Let the young ones build their life." A tragic comedy was unfolding right there among the candlelight. They thought I would be ashamed, touched, or nod in agreement. But I felt only one thing. In their eyes, I wasn't my son's mother. I was a debt to be paid off and erased. I leaned back in my chair, dabbing my lips with the napkin. My voice stayed calm. "An interesting proposal, Celeste. But tell me, how much would this gift be?" She smiled. "I think 500, maybe 700 a month would be fair." "I see. 700 to disappear from my son's life," I repeated, each word deliberate. Celeste froze. "Oh no, you misunderstand. We only want to help." "I know," I said, resting my hand on the table, "helping a way that makes others smaller so you can look bigger." The table fell silent. Daniel whispered, "Mom." I looked at him and shook my head gently, signaling him not to interfere. I turned my glass slowly, candlelight rippling through the clear water. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs like a steady drumbeat. I took a deep breath. "Celeste," I said, my voice low but firm, "I think tonight will be more memorable than you expect, because from this moment, perhaps it's time we start telling the truth." Her eyes flickered. And in them, for the first time, I saw a glint of hesitation, one thing every false sense of confidence fears most, not knowing what comes next. No one at the table spoke after my words, only the sound of waves outside the glass wall and the faint clink of a wine glass trembling as a breeze passed through. The candlelight flickered, reflecting off Celeste's face, the light making the red lipstick on her lips look like a streak of smeared paint. I set my napkin down and smiled faintly. "I have a small question, Celeste. You said you wanted to help, didn't you?" "Yes," she replied, trying to keep her tone sweet. "We've always believed in taking care of family, especially when Daniel is still young with so much responsibility, and you—" "I'm poor," I finished for her. "It's all right. You don't have to avoid the word. I just want to ask what you consider help?" She hesitated, then pressed her lips together. "Just a small, symbolic amount. Like I said, 500, maybe $700 a month." I nodded slowly, my voice low and steady. "Interesting. I never knew a mother's presence came with a set price tag." Celeste looked to her husband for rescue. Roberto set his glass down and smiled faintly. "Mrs. Navarro, please don't take it the wrong way. We only want Daniel and Arya to have a stable start. At your age, life must not be easy. We just want to lighten the load for your son." I looked straight at him. "So that burden is me?" The air froze. Arya swallowed hard. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, signaling him to stay silent. "May I ask one more thing?" I said, my eyes fixed on Celeste. "When you pay for your daughter's rent, her wedding, her honeymoon, do you ever wonder what you're really buying?" Celeste laughed softly, but her lips trembled. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I mean it seriously," I said, tilting my head, my voice dropping lower. I've seen many people use money to buy loyalty or respect. I just want to know how much love and respect cost you. Her composure started to crack. I think you're taking this too far. No, I interrupted. You've spent the whole dinner talking about the value of food, wine, apartments, and gifts. I'm simply continuing your own conversation. Roberto exhaled sharply. That's enough. This is a family dinner, not an interrogation. Exactly, I smiled. Family. A place where people treat each other with respect, not with their bank balances. Celeste flushed. You're insulting us. I'm only reflecting what you've done to me all evening, I replied calmly. From the way you ordered the simplest dish for me to your offer to pay me a few $100s a month so I won't bother your son. Daniel stood up, tense. Mom, that's enough. You don't have to. Sit down, I said softly but firmly. Let them listen. I turned back to Celeste. Do you know what I've been doing for the past 30 years? Celeste blinked and shook her head. I only know you work in an office. Yes, I said, an office. The Pacific Link office. I'm the regional vice president of operations. I sign contracts worth tens of millions. I oversee more than 5,000 employees. And I make $35,000 a month. The entire table went silent. Aria's mouth fell open. Daniel froze. Roberto straightened his posture. Celeste looked at me as if I had just claimed to be an astronaut. I don't believe you, she whispered. If that's true, why live like this? Why not? I asked. Do you think money only has value when it's hanging on display? Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out an old leather wallet. I opened it and took out a black corporate card, the silver edge glinting in the candlelight. This is my company card. No limit. I could pay for this dinner 10 times over if I wanted. Celeste stared at the card as if it were a venomous snake, unable to say a word. I'm not saying this to boast, I continued, my tone calm. I'm saying it so you understand that my silence never meant weakness. I chose simplicity not because I'm poor, but because I don't need validation from anyone. I leaned slightly forward, meeting her gaze. You asked if it's hard living alone. No, Celeste. What's hard is sitting at a table with people who have everything except respect. Aria burst into tears. Daniel pressed a hand to his forehead, whispering, Oh God, Mom. I turned to my son, my tone softening. Don't apologize. I know you just wanted peace. But sometimes to find true peace, we have to give up the illusion of it. Then I looked toward Roberto. You were right. This is a family dinner. But what kind of family survives when people buy silence with money? When they call love a burden? Celeste tried to speak, her voice shaking. I just wanted to help. No, I said, voice low but clear. You wanted control. You wanted to make sure your daughter's mother-in-law would never make her feel less. But the truth is, you're the one who becomes smaller when you keep trying to stand taller than others. I stood up. The chair scraped softly against the floor. Celeste, you've spent this evening talking about travel, investments, and luxury. But you haven't asked me one thing. Am I happy? You haven't asked Daniel if he's happy. Because you don't care about people. You care about appearances. The silence was so deep that even the waves below the cliff seemed louder. Celeste bit her lip, tears welling but refusing to fall. She tried to keep her back straight, but the pride in her eyes had cracked. I spoke slowly, each word cutting cleanly through the air. You said I should disappear from your son's life? Then let me make you a counteroffer. I'll give you $1 million right now if you can prove you've ever helped someone without expecting something in return. Celeste's mouth fell open. No one breathed. I continued. You don't have to answer. I already know it's no. Because truly wealthy people don't talk about money every 5 minutes. Truly dignified people don't need to be seen to be respected. I placed the card on the table, right in front of her. Use it to pay for dinner. Consider it a gift from the poor woman you pitied. Then I stepped back. Daniel sat frozen. Aria covered her face. Roberto lowered his head, his hand gripping the table until his knuckles turned white. Celeste sat in silence, her trembling hand hovering over the silver card, its reflection shining across her face, bare, shaken, stripped of every trace of grandeur. For the first time that evening, no one at the table saw me as the simple one anymore. No one in that room could breathe. Even the sound of the waves seemed to recede. I remained where I was, my hand lightly touching the edge of the chair, looking straight at Celeste, the woman who just minutes earlier had been so confident she treated me like a cheap ornament in her lavish dinner. Now she looked like a wax figure melting under candlelight. "You said you wanted to help," I repeated, my voice low but clear. "I believe you meant it, but kindness cannot be wrapped in contempt. It only has value when it is not accompanied by pity." Celeste did not answer. Her eyes trembled as they fixed on the card on the table, as if it were evidence of a guilt she had not yet managed to hide. I saw the corners of Roberto's mouth tighten, and Arya lowered her head, her shoulders quivering. Daniel, my son, looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, not fear and not anger, but astonishment and shame at himself. I drew a long breath and spoke slowly. "You probably think I am being dramatic, but believe me, I have sat at many tables like this, where people wear suits and speak of culture, yet treat each other with disdain. I have watched the most powerful fall for a simple reason. They forget that respect is the only asset that cannot be bought." Celeste inhaled, trying to recover her poise. "You misunderstand. I think Daniel deserves to be in a fitting environment. We had no ill intent." I nodded slightly. "I understand. But you forgot one thing. Being a fit match is not in the money in one's wallet, it is in dignity and how people treat one another." I turned to my son. "Daniel, do you know why I kept silent all these years?" He did not answer. I looked straight at him. "Because I wanted you to learn to stand on your own feet, not on my title or money. But tonight I realize I was partly wrong. I forgot to teach you the most important thing. Never bow to contempt, even when it is wrapped in the name of politeness." Daniel lowered his head. I saw his shoulders tremble slightly. Perhaps he was trying to digest it all, that his simple mother was in fact a senior executive, that his wife's family, the people he tried so hard to please, had just been exposed in their arrogance, and that he had stayed silent throughout dinner. At the same time, they treated his mother like a burden. Celeste still tried to hold her posture. "Mrs. Navarro," she said, her voice hoarse, "if I offended you, I apologize, but you should not turn a family dinner into a display of power. Money does not make anyone noble." I let out a soft laugh, weary but sincere. "I completely agree. I have not used money to humiliate anyone. I only reflected what you did. I do not need numbers to prove my worth, Celeste. I only want you to understand that when you measure others by their wallet, you accidentally reveal the price of yourself." She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to defend. Arya looked up, her voice trembling. "Why did you not tell Daniel earlier? He always thought you struggled and lived frugally. I asked him why he did not support you more, and he said you did not like to accept help." I looked at the girl, my gaze softening. "Because I did not want anyone to carry me, dear. People are only truly free when they know how to stand up on their own. I spent a lifetime learning that." Arya bit her lip, eyes reddening. "I am sorry. I truly did not know you had to be that strong." I nodded gently. "It is all right. Sometimes people need a shock to recognize real values. Today, that lesson is for all of us." I looked toward Roberto. He had been silent, but on his face I saw something I had never seen on Celeste, a trace of honest shame. "Mrs. Navarro," he said quietly, "I think you are right. We were wrong to judge. And I do not feel proud of how I sat at this table tonight." I smiled. "No one here needs to be ashamed. We have only just taken off our masks, the masks of prejudice, of pride, of the things we mistook for propriety. When the mask falls, we have a chance to see ourselves again." Celeste turned away, her voice rough. "I only want my daughter to be happy. And I want the same for my son," I replied. "But I think we have just seen it clearly. Happiness cannot be built on contempt. If their marriage starts with deciding who is more worthy, it is already lost before the ceremony begins." She stayed silent. A tear slid down, cutting through the powder on her cheek. The waiter came to clear the table. I nodded to signal the bill. Celeste raised her hand to stop him, but I simply said, "This meal is on me." The waiter glanced at the black card, paused in mild surprise, then bowed deeply. "Thank you, Mrs. Navarro." I stood and put on my coat. "Cobalt Terrace is truly beautiful," I said, "but tonight will likely make it hard for me to return." As I prepared to leave, Daniel stood abruptly. "Mom, I placed my hand on his shoulder and squeezed lightly. "There is nothing to say. Just remember, my son, self-respect never makes you lose anything. It only shows you who truly deserves to stay." I looked at Celeste one more time. "I do not hate you. Truly. I only regret that someone who has everything has never learned how to live simply without feeling inferior." I stepped outside. The restaurant door opened, and the sea wind swept in. The air was cold but pleasant, smelling of salt, lavender, and something very light, the scent of freedom. I heard the waves pound the cliffs below, and suddenly I laughed. For the first time in many years, I felt as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer the simple mother my son pitied, nor the woman who must sit still before arrogance. I was simply myself, a woman who has lived long enough to know that silence does not mean weakness, and simplicity is sometimes the garment of those who have weathered storms. I glanced back through the glass. Celeste had lowered her head, her hand still resting on the card no one dared put away. Candlelight reflected her face, no longer proud, only bewildered and carrying a late-coming shame. I walked on, my shoes tapping the wooden floor like beats closing a chapter, and I knew in my heart this was not the end. Everything had only just begun. I stood in the parking lot outside Cobalt Terrace, hands tucked into my coat pockets, taking a deep breath. The night air in La Jolla carried the salt of the sea and the coolness of the early mist. Luxury cars glided past, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement, while the woman in a faded gray dress and worn shoes felt lighter than ever. I wasn't angry, nor was I pleased. I simply felt a strange quiet blooming inside my chest, like the moment one removes a piece of armor they've worn for too long. At this age, I've learned that some battles don't need to be won. It's enough to remain standing without bowing. The restaurant door opened behind me. Familiar footsteps approached. "Mom," Daniel called softly. I didn't turn right away. I wanted to hear his voice before seeing the face filled with regret. "Please don't leave yet. I'm sorry." I turned. Daniel stood there, his tie loosened, eyes uncertain. I didn't know they would act like that. I just thought, "You wouldn't mind if dinner were simple. I didn't mean for them to insult you." I nodded gently. "I know, you had no ill intentions, but you stayed silent while they did." He lowered his head, lips trembling. "I was afraid. If I spoke up, Arya would feel uncomfortable. I just wanted peace." I stepped closer and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Son, sometimes the peace we try so hard to keep is exactly what lets everything rot from the inside. I don't need you to defend me, but I need you to have the courage to know when to speak." Daniel bit his lip, his eyes glistening. "I'm awful." "No," I said. "You're just learning, and this lesson isn't cheap, so remember it." We stood in silence for a while. The sound of waves hit the cliffs in the distance. The restaurant's golden light reflected on Daniel's face, and for a moment I saw the 8-year-old boy he once was, clutching my hand on the shore asking, "Mom, if the sea dries up, will the fish die?" I had said, "No, they'll swim farther to find another place." And now I had to remind him of that again. "I don't need you to protect me," I said slowly. "I've protected myself my whole life. But I want you to be different. I want you to know that self-respect can't be borrowed. And if someone makes you shrink just to be accepted, that isn't love, Daniel." He looked up, eyes red. "I understand. I'll talk to Arya." "Good," I smiled. "But don't talk to defend me. Talk so you can be honest with yourself." I turned to leave, but Arya stepped out. She no longer had that confident, haughty look from the restaurant. Her eyes were swollen, her hands trembling around her purse. "Mrs. Navarro," she said softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at the young woman my son loved, and under the dim golden light, I saw no pretense, only a confused girl raised in a home where money was the only language spoken. "I'm not angry with you," I said. "Truly." Perhaps if I'd grown up in your family, I would have judged others by their wallets too. What matters is whether you can change that. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm ashamed. When my mother said you were poor, I believed her. I thought I understood everything, but I didn't understand strength at all. I smiled. Strength isn't about speaking louder than others, Arya. It's about staying upright in silence. Arya nodded, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged me. Her body trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry for letting them hurt you. I promise I won't let it happen again." I squeezed her shoulders gently. "Thank you, but don't promise me. Promise yourself. Build your family on respect, not control." Celeste came out soon after, her face pale. Her eyes met mine, held for a few seconds, then turned to her daughter. "Arya, let's go," she said. Arya looked at me, pleading silently. I nodded slightly. "Go. Let tonight teach us what we need to remember." Celeste stood still for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Navarro, I know my tone was wrong. Perhaps I've been respected for so long that I forgot respect isn't something others owe me. I apologize." I looked at her with a thin smile. "I believe that apology, Celeste. Even if it comes late, it still matters. Thank you for saying it." She lowered her head, her gaze heavy. In her eyes, I saw no pride left, only the fatigue of someone realizing their mistake too late. They left. Roberto's SUV rolled slowly out of the parking lot, its red taillights fading into the mist. Daniel still stood beside me, silent. I knew what he was thinking, but I said nothing. Some lessons are best taught by time, not by mothers. I turned and walked toward the small slope leading to the cliffs. The sea wind blew hard, tossing my hair back. Below, the water was dark and deep, reflecting the pale moonlight. I stood there for a moment, letting the cold air brush my face, and felt alive. Truly alive. I remembered every stage of my sleepless nights in that tiny room when Daniel was a baby, the times I was underestimated by my bosses, and the contracts I fought to secure. Every old wound seemed soothed by this moment, the instant I realized I no longer needed to prove anything. I only needed to exist as who I truly was. In the distance, I heard my phone vibrating in my pocket. A message appeared on the screen. "Mom, I love you. I promise I'll do the right thing." I smiled softly. My hands were cold, but my heart felt strangely warm. I lifted my head toward the night sky. No more candlelight, no more expensive wine, no more cruel words. Only the sound of waves, the wind, and a woman who had weathered the storm, peaceful, strong, and no longer afraid of being judged. I whispered to myself, as if speaking to the woman I was 20 years ago. Sometimes emotional justice doesn't come from making others kneel. It comes when you can walk away without anger. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the window of my small North Park apartment, shining across the old wooden table where I brewed my coffee every day. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, blending with the soft sound of a jazz tune playing on the radio, Autumn Leaves. Everything was as peaceful as always, except for one thing. Inside me, there was a light emptiness, as if something I had carried for years had finally been set down. I opened the window. The early breeze carried the ocean's dampness, making the thin curtain flutter. Far away, seagulls cried against the pale gray sky. I wondered if, across the city, Celeste was waking up with the same feeling I had on a strange morning where silence replaced all her polished words. The phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom." His voice was soft, hesitant. "Are you awake?" "For a while now," I replied, taking a sip of coffee. "What is it, son?" "I just wanted to say I talked to Arya. She wanted to apologize again, and, you know what? She cried a lot last night. She said she'd never seen her mother so quiet before." I smiled. Silence can be frightening when someone has never learned how to listen. Daniel sighed. "Mom, I'm sorry too, for not understanding you. I thought you wanted to keep your life small and private. I didn't realize you chose silence to teach me something." "It's all right, Daniel," I said warmly. "Some lessons can only be understood after you face your own shame. I've been there too. He chuckled softly, his voice trembling. "Mom, I love you," I replied gently. "I know, and I love you too. But now, live in a way that honors the lesson from last night. Remember, money can buy many things, except self-respect." After the call, I sat still. Sunlight glimmered across my coffee cup, creating soft golden streaks. My heart felt calm. There was no feeling of victory, no satisfaction, a quiet ease, like stepping out of a locked room and breathing deeply for the first time. By noon, I went out. The small street along University Avenue was bustling as usual. Coffee shops were open, the air thick with the scent of pastries and vanilla. I stopped by the flower shop on the corner. The young owner smiled. "The usual, Mrs. Elena? A bouquet of lavender?" I nodded. "But add a few stems of eucalyptus, please. I want the scent to be stronger today." She wrapped the bouquet with a thin twine. I paid, lifted the flowers to my nose. The fragrance seeped softly into my palms, reminding me of the lavender in the restaurant, the sea salt, and the scent of freedom. On the way home, I passed by the small park near my apartment. It used to be where Daniel and I sat when he was little. I chose the old wooden bench beneath the maple tree. An elderly couple was feeding pigeons, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. I opened my phone and saw a new message. "Mrs. Navarro, this is Aria. Thank you for not using anger as revenge. I understand now that kindness doesn't need to speak loudly. I hope you'll allow me to see you again, not as a future daughter-in-law, but as someone who wants to learn how to become a better woman." I read it again and again. A small smile spread across my lips. "This girl," I whispered. Perhaps what happened yesterday wasn't just the end of a hollow relationship, but the beginning of something more genuine. By evening, I sat in my living room and opened my laptop. My inbox was full of messages from colleagues and partners after my speech at the Pacific Link conference was posted online. I noticed one subject line from headquarters. "Congratulations, Elena Navarro, nominated for this year's Humanitarian Leadership Award." I laughed softly. If Celeste knew, she'd probably faint. But no, I didn't feel the need to tell anyone. Some accomplishments are only beautiful when kept in silence. I closed the laptop and stepped out onto the balcony. From here, I could see the horizon where sea and sky merged. The wind blew gently, lifting a few silver strands of my hair. I remembered the look on Celeste's face when she saw the black card. Not because of the money, but because she saw herself reflected in the image of someone who once believed power lived in a wallet, until she faced a person who needed no display to make her feel small. I didn't blame her. I'd met many like her in my life, and once I had been one of them too, craving recognition, fearing invisibility, dressing myself in glitter to hide the fear underneath. Now, I felt compassion more than anger. Because in the end, all of us are just people trying to be seen, to be loved, to be understood. As the sunset spread across the sky, my phone lit up again. An unknown number. I answered. Celeste's voice came through, weary but sincere. "Mrs. Navarro, thank you for not making me feel smaller. I taught my daughter wrong, taught her that love means control. Maybe I need to learn again." I smiled. "It's never too late to learn, Celeste. And the fact that you can say this means you've already begun." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "If possible, I'd like to invite you for dinner, not at a fancy restaurant, but at my home. I want you to know I truly am sorry." I thought for a few seconds, then replied, "Maybe someday, when we've all learned how to talk without the masks." She let out a soft laugh. "I'll be waiting." After hanging up, I looked toward the sea. The water reflected the amber hues of dusk, seagulls gliding low across the waves. I suddenly realized that emotional justice doesn't come from making others suffer as we once did, but from letting them face their own pain. I closed my eyes and breathed in the lavender scent from the bouquet on the table. And for the first time in many years, I no longer felt alone. A week after that night at Cobalt Terrace, I began to write again. Not work emails or financial reports, but letters to the ones never sent, the words never spoken. Every morning, I sat by the window, coffee steaming beside me, and the blank page waiting. Each word, each sentence, was like threading together fragments of memories that had long been scattered. The first letter I wrote was for Daniel. I told him about the years I worked 16-hour days, the first night I took him to the clinic when he was only 3 months old, and how I once feared I would never be good enough to be a mother. I wrote, "My son, I didn't hide the truth because I wanted you to think I was strong. I hid it because I wanted you to believe that true strength doesn't come from money. Now I realize that hiding can also turn love into distance. If there's one thing I regret, it's letting you see me through a fog that was too thick. But perhaps today, that curtain has lifted. And finally we can see each other clearly, not through roles, but through truth." I placed that letter in an envelope but didn't seal it. Some words only need to be written, not delivered. The second letter I wrote was for Celeste. I didn't know if she would ever read it, but I wanted to write it anyway. "Celeste, I understand you more than you think. I used to be like you, trying to control everything just to feel safe. I know the fear of a world that no longer revolves around you, of the people you love not needing you anymore. But what we need to learn is to let go. Not letting go of people, but letting go of the fear of being forgotten. Only then can we love without possession." I placed that second letter beside the first, then sat quietly. The morning sunlight fell across the table, illuminating 2 white envelopes for the past, one for the future. By noon, Daniel stopped by. He brought lunch and a small bouquet. "I bought white roses for you, my first time picking them myself." I smiled. "Now you understand the difference between flowers bought with thought and those bought with a credit card, right?" He laughed shyly. "I do. And Aria wants to visit this weekend. She said she'll bring those empanadas you love." "Yes," I said. "I love empanadas, but I love her honesty more." Daniel sat down, looking around my small apartment. "I used to think you lived with so little, but now I see this is real wealth. Not loud, not flashy, but everything has meaning." I nodded. "When you no longer need to prove anything, that's when you know you already have enough." In the afternoon, after Daniel left, I stepped out onto the balcony. Below, the city of San Diego stretched wide under golden sunlight. I could see kites flying far above the shore, and for a moment turning 60 no longer felt heavy. It felt like a new season, lower, softer, but still full of life. My phone rang. A new email from Aria. "Mrs. Navarro, my mother, asked me to thank you. Last night, she said something I wanted to share with you." I once thought Mrs. Navarro's silence was arrogance, but now I understand its strength. I read that line 3 times. Not because I needed to be sure, but because it warmed me in a way that came not from victory, but from quiet acknowledgement. That evening, I went to the beach. The night waves were calm, the sky scattered with stars. I held 2 envelopes in my hands, one for Daniel, one for Celeste. I opened the one for Celeste, tore it gently at the edge, and let it go into the wind. The paper lifted, curled, and fell into the sea. I watched it drift away and smiled. Some words don't need to reach anyone. They just need to be released. I kept the letter for Daniel. Tomorrow when he visits, I'll give it to him. Not for him to read, but for him to keep as a reminder that sometimes the greatest love is the kind that doesn't need to be proven. On my way home, I stopped by my usual coffee shop on the corner. The waitress recognized me and smiled. "Long time no see, ma'am. The usual coffee?" "The usual," I said. When she brought it over, I noticed a group of women sitting by the window, chatting cheerfully, but one of them weighted her eyes. She looked about my age, stirring her coffee endlessly without taking a sip. That look reminded me of myself a few years ago, tired and silent. As I stood to leave, I passed their table and quietly placed a small piece of paper in front of her. On it was written one line, "It's never too late to begin again." She looked up, eyes wide, then nodded gently. I smiled and walked out. The night sky was clear. Streetlights shimmered against my hair, reflecting the silver strands like threads of light. I felt not just alive, but renewed in faith, in dignity, and in the ability to love without conditions. Because sometimes the unsent letters are the deepest things we ever say. 3 weeks after that night at Cobalt Terrace, I received a handwritten letter, rare in this day and age. The paper was cream-colored, the handwriting neat, elegant, slightly slanted. In the top right corner was a small note. From Celeste Rivera. I set my teacup down and stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Dear Mrs. Navarro, I don't expect you to reply, but I needed to write. For the past 3 weeks, I've been thinking a lot. I realized I've spent my whole life wanting others to look up to me, and in doing so, I forgot to learn how to look at them as equals. Aria told me about your letters and about what you said that night. Kindness cannot be wrapped in contempt. I haven't been able to sleep since I heard that. I would like to invite you to lunch at my home. Not to apologize again, but to do something I've never done before, listen. I reread the letter, a strange mix of surprise and serenity swelling in me. I folded it and placed it in the drawer next to Daniel's childhood photo. Everyone has a moment of awakening, and perhaps this was Celeste's. The next day, I drove to the hilltop estates of Torrey Pines, where the Rivera family lived. The road curved through rows of tall cypress trees, the wind from the ocean carrying the scent of salt and pine resin. When I arrived, the gate was open. Aria came out to greet me, her face bright, nothing like the anxious expression she wore that night at Cobalt Terrace. Mrs. Navarro, thank you for coming. My mother's in the kitchen. She made paella herself. I smiled. Did she now? I'm intrigued already. The house was filled with sunlight, warm and open. Gone was the sense of ostentatious luxury I remembered from the photos. On the dining table stood a vase of lavender and 2 simple golden plates of paella. Celeste stood by the stove, wearing a white blouse, her hair neatly tied back. She looked up when I entered. Hello, she said softly. Thank you for coming. The paella looks wonderful, I replied gently. I hope it tastes as good as it looks, she said with a faint laugh. I've never cooked this for anyone outside my family, but today I wanted to make it myself, not for a guest, but for someone I want to learn from. We sat down. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft clinking of spoons against plates, the aroma of saffron filling the air. Finally, Celeste spoke. I think if I hadn't invited you here, I would have stayed that same woman from that dinner, arrogant, afraid, and hollow. I don't want to be her anymore. I smiled, my tone calm. Recognizing that is a beautiful beginning. None of us is born humble. We only learn humility when life forces us to bend. Celeste nodded, her eyes glistening. You know, that night when I got home, I took off the pearl necklace I was wearing and threw it on the floor. I stared at it and wondered what I'd been wearing it for other than to hide my fear of being forgotten. I stayed silent, letting her speak. Some confessions don't need agreement, they just need to be heard. She continued, My whole life, I taught Aria how to pick a dress, how to enter a room so people would notice, how to behave so she'd always be above. But I never taught her how to apologize or how to recognize when she's wrong. That night when I looked at you, I saw something I'd never seen, the calm of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. And I felt ashamed. I set my spoon down and met her eyes. We've all worn masks, Celeste. The only difference is that I took mine off a little earlier than you. She laughed quietly, wiping her tears. I want to thank you. Not for sparing me humiliation, but for showing me that dignity doesn't need to shout. You made me see myself in the mirror I've been avoiding. It wasn't me, I said. It was the truth. It has its own way of shining light, as long as we're brave enough to look. We sat a while longer. The sea breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of lavender and saffron. At 60, I had learned that emotional justice doesn't need applause. It only needs one person willing to face their flaws and start again. Before I left, Celeste took my hand, a genuine smile forming on her lips. If you don't mind, may I call you by your name? Elena, isn't it? I nodded. Of course, Celeste. After all, 2 women of the same age shouldn't speak like strangers. As I stepped outside, I saw Daniel and Aria standing on the porch. They smiled, relieved. Aria ran to hug me. Thank you for coming. She's really changed. She told me that for the first time in her life she feels free. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. That's good. Freedom is when you no longer need to be right, only honest. My car rolled down the winding road by the hill. Before turning, I looked back and saw Celeste still standing at the door, waving lightly, her face peaceful, as if she'd finally set down a burden she'd carried for too long. That afternoon, I stopped by the beach. I took off my shoes and let my bare feet sink into the sand. The waves rolled in cold but gently. I walked slowly, listening to the wind, the water, and my heartbeat blending as one. I thought about Celeste, about Aria, about Daniel, and about myself. 3 generations of women, 3 ways of loving, all learning the same lesson. Love cannot exist without respect. The sun was setting, the sky draped in silk like orange. I stood still, inhaling the scent of salt, of wind, of a life lived truthfully. I whispered to myself, smiling softly like the tide, emotional justice isn't about winning, it's about being free within your soul. 2 months after that afternoon at Torrey Pines, I returned to my office after my first long vacation in nearly 10 years. The building still stood tall on Harbor Drive, its glass windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like giant mirrors. I walked through the lobby, greeted the familiar receptionist, and felt something different, lightness, as if the invisible weight that had pressed on my shoulders for years had finally lifted. On my desk, the inbox was filled with congratulatory letters. I had just been named Woman of the Year in Corporate Humanitarian Leadership, a title I once thought I didn't need, but as I looked at the embossed certificate, I suddenly understood that sometimes recognition isn't flattery. It's the reflection of a quiet journey. That afternoon, Daniel and Aria came to my office. Aria brought a small wooden frame, inside it a photograph taken at the beach, one from the day Celeste and I spoke. 3 of us, me, Aria, and Celeste, standing together with the crimson sunset behind us. Celeste was smiling a real smile, free of distance or defense. Aria said, "I wanted to give this to you. My mother calls it the light wall." She said if every woman who stumbled could hang a picture of where she learned something, the world would be much brighter. I looked at the photo for a long moment, then whispered, "Maybe we should start that. A wall of light for those brave enough to change." That night, I took the picture home and placed it on the empty wall across from the window. I hung it between older photographs, one of Daniel at his graduation, one of me with my mother, and one from the day I signed my first contract. Beside the new picture, I wrote in silver ink, "The light wall, for those who dare to begin again." And I realized, beginning again wasn't just something I had done, it was something I was living. In the days that followed, I started a small project called the Second Horizon Fund, a personal foundation supporting midlife women restarting their careers. I didn't make any grand announcements, just quietly reached out to a few organizations I had worked with before. Within a month, the fund had received over 70 applications. I read each one carefully, stories of mothers who had lost their jobs, wives abandoned, women who once believed turning 50 meant the end. Every letter reminded me of myself, of that night in the elegant restaurant when I, too, had been judged and had chosen to stand tall with the truth. One morning, as I was reviewing the applications, Aria called, "Mrs. Elena, I wanted to tell you my mother has started teaching." She opened a class for newly arrived immigrant women, teaching them basic financial management, job skills, and even how to write aid applications. She said if it weren't for you, she'd probably still be choosing expensive watches instead of real value. I smiled. "Tell your mother she just did something I never thought she was teaching: humility." That afternoon, Daniel dropped by. He hugged me tightly. "Mom, Aria and I are looking for a house. It's not big, but it has a small garden. I want you to come see it." "You want me to move in with you?" He laughed. "No, I want you to plant lavender in the corner. So every time I smell it, I'll remember the day you taught me that being rich means never needing to prove it." I laughed softly, my eyes stinging. "All right, I'll plant lavender and eucalyptus, so you'll remember that strength always walks with gentleness." That evening, as the city lights came on, I stepped onto the balcony. Across the street, the windows of Cobalt Terrace were still lit, reflecting over the bay. I looked at it for a while, a place that had once been a battlefield of emotions, now just a memory without bitterness. It was simply a piece of the mosaic, necessary but not defining. My phone buzzed. A message from Celeste. Elena, today I hung our photo on the living room wall. Below it I wrote, "The day I learned what dignity looks like." I read it and typed back. And beneath mine I wrote, "The day I learned that forgiveness is the highest form of justice." After sending it, I set my phone down. A sea breeze swept through, carrying the scent of lavender from the pot I'd planted on the balcony. I inhaled deeply, closed my eyes, letting the wind brush my face, letting the past dissolve into the salt of the night. I thought of my mother, a poor, uneducated woman who once told me, "You don't have to defeat anyone to be strong. Just stay kind when others don't." That sentence, forgotten for so many years, echoed clearly now. I turned back toward the wall of light. Under the golden lamp, the photographs shimmered like tiny stars. I knew I hadn't built a wall of memories, but a wall of freedom from judgment, from fear, from the roles society forced women to play. I sat on the sofa, opened my leather notebook, and wrote on the last page. Day 60 since that defining night. I've stopped pretending to be poor, but I no longer need wealth to be respected. I only need to be a woman who has learned that justice doesn't need to win, it only needs to be right. Outside, the church bells rang in the distance. I smiled softly and lit a candle on the table, not to pray, but to remind myself that light doesn't need to be bright to drive away the dark. Sometimes, just a single flame is enough to illuminate an entire life. 1 year after the afternoon I hung the first photo on the light wall, San Diego was glowing under the Sunday. March had arrived, and the ocean breeze carried the scent of lavender and the laughter of people walking along the bay. I woke earlier than usual, made coffee, opened the window, and let the light pour in. On the table, the calendar had a red mark on today's date, the Lightwall Foundation opening ceremony. No one could have imagined that a small idea about a wall of light would spread this far. What began as a few personal photos in my small apartment had now become a community project exhibition space for women reborn after loss, where they could hang a photo representing the moment they stood up again. Over 200 photos were sent in, each one a life, a storm, a sunrise, and today I was to give the opening speech. When the car arrived at the plaza near the shore, I saw a long line of people waiting outside the gate. The wind fluttered the white ribbons tied to the archway. Daniel was there, standing next to Arya. They waved, faces bright with pride. I stepped out, my hands trembling from fear, but from emotion. Celeste was there too. She wore a simple beige blouse, her silver hair neatly tied back. When she saw me, she smiled and hugged me softly. I came to the right place, at the right time. And with the right people, I replied. Inside the exhibition hall, light reflected off the walls like shards of mirrors. Dozens of photos hung on clean white panels, a woman holding her grandchild, another standing before the house she built herself, one laughing in her sewing workshop, one holding a college diploma at 60. Each had a small card beneath it, with words they had written, "The day I chose forgiveness," "The day I learned to love myself," "The day I stopped being afraid." I walked down the corridor, fingers brushing each frame. Beneath every photo, I saw a piece of myself. Year-old secretary, the 30-year-old single mother, the 60-year-old woman silent in a humiliating dinner, and the storyteller I had become today. At the end of the hall stood the largest photograph. 3 women by the same, Celeste and Arya. Beneath it were the words, "It's never too late to begin again." Applause rose from behind. Daniel approached and handed me the microphone. I looked out at the audience, faces glowing, some wiping tears, some holding hands. I began to speak, slow and steady, my voice calm yet firm. Someone once asked why I called this place the Light Wall. Because light doesn't care about age, the past, or mistakes. It only needs a crack to shine through. Every woman in this room has opened her own crack of light, sometimes after a heartbreak, sometimes after a terrible dinner, sometimes after realizing her silence had lasted long enough. We don't need revenge to have justice. We only need to stand, live truthfully, and let kindness do the rest. Emotional justice isn't when others bow their heads when we can lift ours in front of the mirror. The room fell silent. I saw Celeste's eyes glistening, Daniel holding Aria's hand tightly, and in the back row, an older woman with silver hair nodding, her lips whispering, "Yes." I ended with words of gratitude. Thank you to those who hurt, for they taught me boundaries. Thank you to those who stayed, for they are the true light. And thank you to myself for never giving up on the belief that happiness can still arrive, even late. The applause swelled. Aria walked up and handed me a bouquet of the first bloom Daniel had planted in their new garden. She said, "Mrs. Elena, this is the first flower that bloomed. I think it belongs to you." I held it close, inhaled its gentle scent, and suddenly understood that every circle has both a beginning and an end, and sometimes they are the same. As evening fell and the crowd thinned, I stayed behind, walking the wall once more. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the glass, bathing every photo in gold. My shadow merged with the smiling faces of hundreds of women on the wall. Celeste came to stand beside me and said softly, "I used to think the end came when you lost everything. Now I know. The true end is when you stop wanting to change. Thank you for making me begin again." I squeezed her hand gently. "We're all walking the same road, Celeste. Some of us just started a little earlier." As I stepped out of the hall, the evening breeze brushed against my skin, carrying the scent of lavender and the sound of waves from afar. I looked up at the fading sunlight stretched across the water in shimmering ribbons. I thought of the silent years, the unspoken words, the long, lonely nights, and I smiled, because at last I had lived fully, not to prove, not to win, but simply to be myself. I stopped at the steps, facing the sea, and whispered as if to my own soul, "The light isn't somewhere far away. It's always been within us, just waiting to be seen." I left the plaza as dusk settled completely. Behind me, the light wall still glowed, shining like a small lighthouse in the heart of the city. And I knew my journey, and all of ours had never truly ended. It had only just begun, in the calmest, truest place within our hearts. Have you ever lived a moment that made you start over? Tell us where you're watching this from, and don't forget to subscribe so you can keep walking with me through Begin Again stories where every wound can turn into light.